You're young and you are in love, and you're passionate about the person you're about to marry. But no one thinks that possibly 28 years later, you will feel just like roommates.
Well, that's where we were. And we had to make some big changes in our marriage. And on this podcast, we're going to talk to you about 3 things that we did that made a big change in our marriage. And we think it can make a big change in your marriage too.
Hi, this is Phil and Priscilla Fretwell here with Savage Marriage.
We're going to talk about how God is healing and restoring marriages today from betrayal, addictions, and the wounds of their past.
And what he did in our marriage, he can do in yours too.
Priscilla, when we look at our first 28 years of marriage, sometimes we think we felt like roommates.
I think we were roommates.
We were mates. Okay.
Yeah.
Roommates with benefits. How about that?
That's right.
How would you, when you think about the word roommates, what kind of picture does that present in your mind?
I see it as more like you're compatible, but you're not intimate, relational with one another. You're just making everything work, right?
Yeah. Well, we were certainly like that a lot. And a lot of things have changed. And, I was thinking about what was happening like that during our year and during that time. And I thought about a few things that characterized our relationship. Okay. You're looking at your outline. This is not on your outline.
Okay.
So I'm just going to ask you I want you to respond to these. Okay. I'm going to give you 2 words.
Okay.
And I want you to respond to the differences in these words. Okay. Happy versus fulfilling.
Well, I think circumstances make you happy.
Okay.
I think fulfilling is something inward in your soul.
Okay. All right. That's good. Activity versus intimacy.
Activity is exactly what we had. We had a lot of activity. We were busy.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of activity, but we were not intimate with one another, like really seeing into not only each other, but seeing into our kids.
Yeah. Okay. And last set, sexual versus spiritual.
I think we hit the sexual.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of people sometimes think you went off on me because I wasn't sexually active with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is incorrect.
Yeah.
But we were not spiritual.
Spiritually connected.
Another thing that we did that was activity.
Yeah.
We did spiritual activities together.
Yeah.
But we were not spiritually known to each other.
Yeah. Well, I picked these words because I looked at the first word I gave you in each one. Like we were trying to be happy. We were trying to have a lot of activities. And I was at least interested in being sexual, right? And I thought if we could just get those 3 things right,
everything will be okay.
Everything would be okay. But I think what we've done is we've exchanged those for words that are more meaningful. And those were the second words I gave you.
Right.
Fulfillment, intimacy, and spirituality. And those things have made a lot of difference.
Yeah, I believe they have.
And so today we're going to talk about 3 things that we've seen that really affected our relationship, and not just ours, but for the past 7 years, we've talked to many, many, many couples, and we believe that these 3 things not only had the power to change our relationship, but also make a significant impact in theirs. And I think if you're listening to this, it'll be a significant impact on your relationship as well.
Yes, I think it will be impactful. But I also want people to know that we have not arrived in this. There were so many ups and downs, so many speed bumps that we hit in the past 7 years that we had to work through.
Yeah.
And we're continuing to work through speed bumps.
Yeah.
So we have not arrived. We are not perfect in this.
No, that is for sure. So anyway, the first area we're going to talk about is actually tied to a verse. It's 1 Peter 5:5, and it's one of your favorite ones.
It is.
Yeah, and it's clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because God opposes the proud, but shows grace to the humble.
It is one of my favorite verses, not that I have achieved this.
Okay.
But it is something that God is always bringing to my mind. What I have found is that it is easier for me to humble myself before the Lord than it is to humble myself towards you.
Yes.
And
me too.
And so it's that thing of, man, I could lay bare before the Lord and just, he knows everything anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes for me to with my relationship with you, my kids, or even my friends, take the position of humility, man, that's tough.
We have found this whole area of humility is really at the core, us trying to figure out how to clothe ourselves with humility. And I think, Priscilla, that the big change we've made is our willingness and desire to share the weaknesses inside of us, because that's something we never did in the past.
And I think we have some things that are fighting against us,
Hmm.
and that is our mindset. Because the mindset that we have, generally speaking, is the natural, which just says, man up.
Yeah. Be
Don't
strong.
be strong. Don't show your weakness, because if you do, they're going to come and get you.
So we know that the Apostle Paul said he would eagerly declare his weaknesses so that the power of Christ might dwell on him. And that was an attitude that he had. He saw that he had that. And we also know they say if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And so this has been a huge change for us.
It really has. I mean, we have been putting things out in front of each other that we never invited each other to do that
And when
before.
we describe this, I think some people think, oh, that's a point of disclosure. That's when you come clean. But that's not it, is it?
No, it's not. It's every day.
It's a way of life.
Right.
And, I remember about a month and a half ago, we were driving somewhere and you wanted to go to a little Brazilian grocery store. And we pulled into a small plaza and I looked over in the corner and I saw a massage parlor that I'd been to. And I turned off the car and you were getting out. And I said, hey, wait a minute, I need to talk to you. Because I said, I've got a trigger. And you said, what is it? And I said, that massage parlor right there, I've been into that.
And I said, let's go in there and tell them about Jesus, because I will go in there and tell them.
And I said, I don't want to go into there in any circumstances. So I was not nearly as spiritual as you were in that. But that was an example for me of coming out and bringing you into something that I could have left that alone. You would never have known, right?
Yeah, that's right. It would have
And
been.
but see what would have happened, it would have registered in my mind. And I would wonder, why is it now that I can't bring Priscilla into this story?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a replay over and over in your head.
It really, really would.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that was an important one for me at that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, one of the other things that I have decided to do, and it's something that most women wish they could change in their life, and I have been one of them,
Okay.
and that is my weight. In the past, I would never have told you, "Please come alongside me in this."
Mhm.
And, this is the first time in my life I've asked you, I need you as a battle partner with my weight. Not to be telling me, "Don't eat that," but to come alongside me and just be able to talk things through, pray with me, and pray for me.
I will tell you, that's been a hard one for me. I've tried to do it some, and
Yeah.
I think we've been more open in that, but I'm still back in our old life,
Right.
right?
It was a touchy subject. I didn't want you in it.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
I find myself tiptoeing around the conversation a little bit because I'm not sure at what point you'll say, that thing I said about the weight, I take it all back. I don't want you involved in my weight. But you've not said that.
No. It's the first time I brought you into it, and it is the first time I brought God into it.
Another key evidence, I think, of this idea of humility is our willingness to put our spouse ahead of us in their needs and wants and desires. And that's tough. I still struggle with that, I think.
We both do, but it is the core truth of God's word that we should humble ourselves one to another, clothe ourselves in humility.
I was listening to somebody and they were talking about they had heard some pastor answer a question from somebody about how do you demonstrate love to your spouse? And so the guy said, and he was kind of one of these old time preachers and everything. He said, it's kind of like this. He says, I'm in the kitchen and I'm cooking me and my wife 2 eggs and I break one of them and I bring them over to the table and I've got one dish with a broken egg and I've got one dish with a nice, perfect fried egg. And he says, I give my wife the perfect egg and I take the broken egg for myself. And, I heard that, Priscilla, and it was really like a knife because, see, I have made you eggs before and I have had one that was broken and I gave you the broken egg.
Yeah, that has
Do you
yeah.
remember that?
Yes, quite a few times that had
You never mentioned it.
No, because I saw myself as deserving the broken egg.
Hmm. Oh, that makes
So,
me sad.
well, I don't see myself like that anymore.
Well, that's good. That's good.
But
But, it's like that a lot, is how do you and it's such little tiny things like that, even taking the bigger like there's 2 pieces of pie.
And you take the bigger
I
one.
take the bigger one. Well, it's just so hard for but, little tiny things. And so I've really tried to make a difference in that. I've tried to not take the biggest piece, little tiny things like that. But those are just representative of bigger parts of our life. Like,
That have not been
I mean,
addressed.
if I can't give you the nice egg, what about when it comes to something that's really important?
Yeah.
So it's making those choices every day. You're prioritizing your spouse ahead of you.
And on the other side of that, right,
Mhm.
is the don't pout when you don't get your way.
Yeah.
Don't, like, okay, I have to take the egg that's broken. I'm going to pout about it because
Yeah.
I gave her the better egg. So there's the no pouting
Yeah.
side to it too.
Yeah. Well, that was an issue with me, and usually around sexuality, right?
Yes.
If it didn't work out my way, I was pouting. I've really tried to make a difference in my
And
pouting.
there has been a change in you with that. And sometimes when things don't work out your way and I see you pouting, I say, "Now, I want you to know that I do want to be with you, but I just can't do it right now."
Yeah. And that actually helps me quite a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah, because see, the pouting is around not so much you, it's around me. I'm not okay. I am not desired. I am not wanted. And you just taking an extra step and assuring me that I am wanted actually helps me quite a lot.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
So there's lots of other examples we could go through. I mean, even the whole thing on being faithful, not having adultery or infidelity. That is a not putting your wife ahead of yourself. That's basically prioritizing yourself. So every time you're looking at porn, you are looking at other women and lusting after them. That is prioritizing yourself instead of your wife.
Another indication of humility is to see who's going to apologize first.
Oh, I hated doing that.
And we all
So,
do. It's kind of like, I'm going to wait for the other person.
but it's not just apologizing for what we did. We've had to learn to apologize for how what I have done has made you feel. And that has been a key difference.
Yeah. And I think the other part of it is not to do, Johnny on the playground, I'm sorry, and, give a hug.
Yeah, hug it out. It'll be fine.
It will be fine. I think there needs to be really a repentance and a brokenness of your actions and how that made the person feel.
Yeah, and there's no waiting.
Right.
I mean, we're not waiting for the other person. We are moving forward with what we can apologize for.
If we were keeping score in our relationship here on who apologizes more, I would say you do. You
Mm.
apologize more than I do.
Well, the other way to look at that is I've got more to apologize for. So that's the issue.
But it's not an official record keeping here.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
just how I see it.
That's how you see it.
Yeah.
Well, I think beyond the apologizing, another key indication here in this area of humility is how often are we asking our spouse for advice? Men, I shouldn't say men, me. Let's talk about me. I would be quicker to ask somebody else for advice over you. I'd ask a counselor, I'd ask one of my buddies, and that's been a big change for us.
Well, I think it goes both ways, right? Women do the same thing. They
Mhm.
call up all their friends and say, "This is the situation. What should I do?
Yeah.
What would you do?
Yeah.
What should I say?"
Yeah, when I ask you for advice, what does that do inside of you?
Well, to tell you the truth, the first time you asked me for advice after coming clean, I was shocked.
Mm,
I was like, "Oh my word, what has happened to this man? He's asking me,
yeah,
of all people, Mr. Know It All, Mr. Phil, who knows all things."
that was me.
Well, I was like, "Wow, this has really changed, and now you want my insight." I saw a big step forward. You matter to me, Priscilla, and what you think and believe and your thoughts are important to me.
Yeah.
That is how I felt.
And so now we're going to move into the second big area.
And this one's a big one.
Yeah.
And I don't believe we see this as being as powerful as it is.
Yeah.
It is speaking words of life.
Mm.
And I know that sometimes we do speak words of death and destruction.
Well, I remember you used to tell our kids all the time
Yes,
this, right?
I did. But it's interesting that I would quote that to them. Are you speaking words of life or words of death?
Right.
But the fact is, there's another part of that verse that I never quoted.
Okay.
And that was, you will eat the fruit that you pick,
Yeah.
either life or death. And that became a big thing 7 years ago, was that I had the power to bring words of life. But if I chose to bring words of death, I was going to eat the fruit of that.
For you Bible followers, she's talking about Proverbs 18:21 about the power of life and death is in the tongue.
Yeah. And related to the topic of words, I have to ask myself the question, have I eliminated destructive criticism from my vocabulary towards my family, towards you, towards my friends?
This is so tough, right?
Yeah.
Because there's something inside of us that the criticism is a subtle way of elevating ourselves, right? It really feeds our ego.
We want to say something to our spouse,
Yeah.
and we got to figure out how to do this. You want to point
You
something
want to
out.
point something out, right? How do you do it?
Well, there's a smile sandwich, which means you say something nice, you say the thing that you're pointing out that might
Okay.
be a little bit of constructive criticism,
Okay.
and then you bring another kind word.
A
So it's
kind word
kinda
at the end.
Yeah, a kind word at the end, and so it's a smile sandwich, and, my son taught me this, and, he says he used to use it at work all the time. It's a smile sandwich that I believe that if we put this into practice, I think the person who's listening to our smile sandwich will receive it.
This has been really hard for me. I will just tell you. And part of it, remember we used to joke and say, I have the gift of criticism. So, and then eventually we figured out it wasn't a gift.
No,
So
it's a spirit of
it's
criticism.
not listed in the spiritual
No.
gifts, the gift of criticism. But I really struggled with this a lot. But I think one thing that we have found helpful is that when you talk to your spouse about something that's offensive, focus more on how it made you feel versus what they did.
Yeah.
Because there's a nuance in that, isn't it?
Right.
That if you've done something and I come to you and I say, you keep doing this over and over, I've told you to stop doing it.
Just stop it.
Yeah, just stop it. Don't do it anymore. I'm offended when you do that, right? The whole focus is completely on you.
It's on the behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if I come to you and say, when you do that, here's what's going on inside of me. It makes me feel not valued, like I'm not worth anything. I have nothing to say, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Or that it has triggered a belief,
Yeah,
a lie that you've believed in. And then you go back to that lie, rethinking.
yeah. It took me back to something in the past,
Right.
right? And see, when I do it like that, now you're focused really on me.
Right.
And ideally, there's some empathy and compassion that comes out in that. Now, that means you've got to take a step toward that as well. I mean, you could say, "Wow, it sucks to be you," right?
That sounds like a you problem.
It does. You could say that, which wouldn't help the situation. But I know you don't say that, right?
Well,
And at least now you don't say it. So while we're talking about this idea of words, an important topic that we've seen in our marriage is this idea of catching bids.
So we need to describe what a bid is, because
Yeah.
we say this to some couples and they go, "What the
No
heck are you
idea.
talking
Yeah.
about?"
So this is something that John Gottman in his work comes out and talks a lot about, but is recently gotten some publicity, and he believes that this is one of the things that will predict whether people stay married or not. How often they catch a bid. So a bid could be anything. It's something that you do or say where there's a subtlety that you're really looking for a response from me. And it could even be like you walk into the kitchen and you just go, ugh, right?
Yeah.
Because you've seen something that doesn't, and so a catch would be, hey, what's going on? Or why the sigh? It's a turning toward you. And what his research says is that, I might not get this exactly right, but order of magnitude, couples that stay married, 80% of bids will be caught. And we give out hundreds of bids every day vying for our spouse's attention. Couples that get a divorce, maybe 20%. Order of magnitude, right? And so it's like at the opposite end of the scale.
Well, and now you and I joke about that because either one of us will give a bid and the other one won't catch it. And we'll go, "Well, that was a bid."
That was a bid. Exactly. Because sometimes we don't know, right?
Right.
So if you're throwing out bids and your spouse isn't catching, just say, "Hey, that was a bid." Okay? And you'll get the idea. And inherent in this thing also, on this idea of catching bids, is you have to respond rather than react. And I will tell you that many spouses won't even make a bid sometimes because they're worried about a reaction versus a response. So a catch is always a thoughtful response versus a reaction. Reaction is like don't think and intuitive, and sometimes it's harsh. And so we've had to really work on that as well.
Another way that we need to evaluate our words of life is through words of appreciation and praise. Are they full of life towards one another?
Yeah, well, I remember in our recovery, laying there in bed when we were just struggling through our conversations and everything, and we would tell each other 2 or 3 things we liked about one another, and that had an impact, and we've seen this even with couples in our class. I mean, we've told many people that what you're saying to your spouse is like you're naming your spouse, these words that you use.
Right. There was one guy that said, I've named my wife a bitch because that's what I call her all the time.
Mm. I remember when that guy said that, and he said it in all humility and regret at the time. But the fact is that you might be focused on appreciation, but one word like that, one word, a contemptuous word, can destroy months and years of good words. So we really, really have to think about how do we get rid of this stuff because it just comes back in and destroys us. So a word of contempt is something where we show our a destructive force to who our spouse really is. We will say something about them that is negative, that they will never get over it. And we know what these buttons are, right? I mean, when we've lived with each other for a long time, we know the button to push to really, really hurt our spouse. And those words of contempt are things that we just have to get rid of.
With words of contempt,
Hmm.
if you cannot be kind, you might as well be silent
Yeah.
because words of contempt do nothing for a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I will tell you that words from you mean more to me than anybody else.
Yeah.
You know, I always like words of admiration and praise. That's one of my love language things,
Yeah.
right? But I want them from you. And I think most people in a healthy relationship would say the words from my spouse mean more than anything else because you mean more to me,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And that's really what we need to go toward.
So we talked about humility, we talked about words of life, and now we're going into cultivating intimacy. When we speak about intimacy, we're talking about spiritual, emotional, and sexual.
And, I like to think of it with this word cultivate because, we remember we had a garden. Well,
Oh,
for several years, we had this big garden, right? And do you remember when we
uh,
first started?
yeah, it was a lot of work.
It was a bunch of weeds. A
That
bunch a
too.
bunch of weeds, right? But this idea of cultivation is something we had to do. We had to prepare it. We got rid of all the weeds. We brought in a bunch of topsoil and we put in seeds and then we picked it. This is part of it. There is a cultivation of spiritual, emotional, and sexual intimacy. And it really is kind of a journey to the inside. And that's been a big change for us.
A lot of people, when you start talking about intimacy, they know the emotional and they know the sexual.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the spiritual side, people are kind of like, what do you mean? Do you mean I go to church with my wife? And I'm like, well, it's a little bit more than activity. And we were very active. We were at church all the time,
Yeah.
but we did not know each other spiritually.
That's the question for all of us. How well do we know our spouse's spiritual journey?
This is a cool one because you and I, 7 years ago, started a spiritual journey together.
Mhm.
We did not have that in the 28.
No.
And so the journey that we have been on, it has evolved in the past 7 years.
Yeah.
It started one way and now we're somewhere else in this journey. And to me, it's always a beautiful picture of how we are in Christ.
Yeah.
We are not the same in Christ as we were many years ago.
Well,
There
we're
should be a development of relationship and intimacy with Christ.
yes. Well, we're all in a journey toward God.
Right.
He's moving us from where we are to where he wants us to be. And now I think for the first time we are sensing that journey,
Mhm.
right? And we're sharing it. How well do I know yours? Which means I have to listen. I have to be a student of you and I have to stay curious and I have to ask these questions. And so it's, I think in the past, if we ever read the Bible together, which wasn't They're
Very.
very often. But we would focus on the text, right?
Yeah.
What is the text
The
saying?
intellect
The
part.
intellect, what is the text saying? So now our questions are around what is that doing inside you?
Mhm.
What do you feel from that? What do you sense about yourself,
What
right?
is God revealing to you?
Yes. What is he telling you? How does that participate in our journey from where we are to where he is moving us to? Not only do I need to be curious about yours, but I need to be transparent about mine. And so a lot of people say, well, I don't know. I don't even know where God's moving me. Well, that's the first step, right? There has to be something to be transparent about. And that's been a big change for us because it's, on one sense, it's easier for me to ask you about yourself.
Than to share what's going on with.
Yes, right. Because see, the sharing is a place of vulnerability.
Yeah. It's opening yourself up.
It's opening the kimono,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And letting you see what's inside.
So this means that your spouse should be the most intimate spiritual relationship that you have,
Rather than the buddies around the table
right?
or your counselor.
Or your girlfriends that I share so much with we are just so close.
Yeah. Well, this is important because we believe, going back to the initial way we entered this whole area on intimacy, that there is spiritual, emotional, and sexual intimacy that we can enjoy in our marriage. But if the spiritual is not the foundation, you really don't have the fuel you need for your marriage because that is the place that you will really, really get it.
Well, some people who are listening to this might say, "Hey, you left some important stuff out, like the vacations, the fun, the sex, what's our purpose?
Yeah.
You left all these things out. Aren't you going to talk about that?"
Yeah, well, those are all the things. Like, if we had to say, how are we going to transform a relationship? Or even back then, if somebody had asked us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, remember, I was the chairman of the elders. If somebody needed an answer, they might call me and we would say, hey, put a little more fun in your relationship. Have you gone on vacation lately? How's your sex life going? Right? All these types of things. And I think what we have found is those are good. They can be healthy for your relationship. But if you don't have humility, words, and spiritual intimacy, none of those things will really compensate for that.
And that's where we were. I mean, we were totally just living each day by itself and I just got to handle today and I'll get there tomorrow, carrying our load on our shoulders, saying, I got this, I got this.
If you feel like in your marriage that you are one of those people shouldering the load, like Priscilla described, and you want to have more than a roommate to talk to about it, we'd encourage you to sit down and think about this podcast together. We've given you a whole bunch of things that tie into the topics of humility, words, and intimacy. And so look at each other in the eye, do a self evaluation, and describe where you think that you are.
And do one more important thing.
What's that?
That is pray before you discuss.
Yes.
I got to tell you, that helps so much.
We've been on the wrong side of that a couple of times, haven't we?
A few times, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as your spouse shares things, if they've rated something either low or something you disagree with, ask for some examples on what it is. Help flesh this out on exactly what are we talking about here.
Or ask about how can I improve this?
Oh, yeah.
You know, I want to improve my score.
And don't be defensive.
No.
That's a big one. Don't be defensive in hearing the advice.
Contact us if you want help, and we will love to talk to you.
So the issues that were in our marriage, Priscilla, ran much deeper than offensive behaviors. And I think that's true for many marriages. And so we believe that the solutions lie in the humility you show, the words you say, and the intimacy you cultivate. This is Phil and Priscilla Fretwell. Thanks for listening. Our book, Savage Marriage: Triumph Over Betrayal and Sexual Addiction, is now available on Amazon.
Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Savage Marriage Ministries. Also, join our Savage Marriage community at savagemarriageministries.com.
And remember, it's God who is at work in your savage adventure.